Hello and welcome to Self Talk. I'm your host, Rachel Astarte. Today, my guest is Shelly Starks. She's the president and CEO of Inline Consulting Services. Her mission is to help businesses overcome internal and external communication barriers with clear and concise tools that align with the organization's vision to position them for scalable growth. And we're going to talk a lot about how the self fits into the business world. So first of all, welcome, Shelly.
Thank you, Rachel, for having me.
It's a pleasure. So we talked just briefly for a few seconds before I started recording, but I'd love to know how you got into this field or what your calling was that got you to where you are.
Years and years ago, when my daughter was young, I started a small business so that I could stay home with her. And as part of that small business, it was predominantly actually working with women in business. And as part of that, I realized early on I needed to figure out ways for, you know, me coaching these women and the different things that I was teaching them. I was realizing they were absorbing or taking in that information differently, and that what they were able to do was really kind of siloed by specific types of behavioral styles. And I hadn't really had a lot of experience in that. So I decided this was over 20 years ago, I decided to find an assessment that would help me, figure out what that is with each one of those so that I could coach them a little bit more in their language, if you will, where they would be more receptive. They would want to, put those defensive gates down and want to actually work with me. And so I found one. Extended disc is the one that I've been certified in for 20 years. And I, was able to adjust their coaching sessions around that behavioral style. And I started noticing a huge difference. So over the years, I have just folded this into everything that I've done, including our blended family. We both, Jay and I had a 20-year marriages, and then we got together and we had two teenage girls. And it's difficult as it is to have two teenage girls. And then on
So,
top of it, on top of that, they're so opposite behavioral styles. And I remember the day after I've been coaching this forever. And I remember the day that I looked at them and said, you guys are going to become my client. Like, our family has to become my client
oh, wow.
because we are not communicating well. And it was really bad. Like,
Mm,
just between the, hormones, the teenage angst, they had two divorced parents. So there were four parents. They were only children. Now they have to share a bathroom. The list kept going and going and going.
my God.
So this is kind of how I landed here. And then it has just snowballed because no matter what I've done over the years, I've realized that the communication aspect of things is key. Like, if you don't have good communication, it doesn't matter what you sell, it doesn't matter what service you offer, what gifts you give to anyone. If they can't receive them in a language that makes sense, you're missing a boat.
Yeah, yeah. So when you talk about internal and external communication, and I wonder if you might speak to that. I'm fascinated by the different behavioral styles and learning how to, it's almost like using rhetoric in a way, in a
Yeah.
positive way. How do I get my message received by this particular personality type, or I think that's what you're saying. Yeah.
Behavioral style. Yeah. Yeah.
And behavioral style. Right. So when we talk about internal and external communication, what does that mean for you? How do you work with that?
So when someone processes out in the room, they process their thoughts out in the room. They oftentimes use their hands. They're not always fully formulated sentences, or maybe there might be a little bit of emotion that's involved in it, right? They're processing externally. So that's an outward communication that's happening. And their behavioral style needs that in order to process through what's happening, but they're just doing it out loud. Then there are people who have internal, processing. They process internally, meaning they still have all of that going on that's happening in the external person's mind. It's just happening inside of them, and they're not saying it out loud for people to hear it or know what's going on. And the huge misnomer here is that the internal processors don't have something to say.
Yeah, right, of course.
And so most people, because our society is so very, culturally, we are, all about, you know, the person who lights up the room, the person that's always so friendly and exciting and fun. And we forget that, there's some downsides to both things, right? There's some downsides to the out in the room processing, and then there's some downsides to the internal processing. But the one that really, the people who are internally processing, I think sometimes, and a lot of times I hear they feel like people just don't understand them, or they don't feel like they've been given the opportunity to express what it is that they are feeling or thinking.
Mhm.
So when we talk about internal or external communication, it's not just how you're doing it, it's literally your behavioral style and how you actually are processing that information.
Mhm. So the internal processors may feel as though it makes sense to them, but they can't see why other people don't get it. Is that the idea?
To some degree. So I work with four different behavioral styles in DISC, and I break up the quadrant by internal processor and out in the room processor, or are they a task oriented or a people oriented person? So when you've got somebody who is task oriented and an internal processor, meaning they are needing to go through those tasks or those things in their mind, then I feel like a lot of times those people get more frustrated because they've already vetted out so much in their mind on the task piece, like they've clicked off all the things, right? So sometimes they don't realize that other people haven't done that kind of internal work already, and they're many steps ahead of the person that they're talking to, and they get frustrated because they don't think that they're understanding as far as they've come in that process in their mind.
Yeah.
So this is why, I mean, I'm fascinated with this because I feel like every style needs to learn their style. They need to learn how to communicate to somebody else's style so it's not comfortable for you, but how can I in the moment kind of, wrap this in a wrapper of a different behavioral style so they feel comfortable. And then that just opens up, again, those defensive gates go down. They have more open communication when someone doesn't feel like they are going into fight or flight mode.
Yes, absolutely. So what would be some tips for an internal processor who is task oriented to be able to wrap it up in that other behavioral style?
I have a daughter. One of my children is 90% that style,
Hmm.
90. It's a very large number. There's not usually large numbers like that. And so we had a really tough time because I'm an out in the room processor and she is an internal processor. And so when a good example was in the morning, we get ready for school and I would ask her, she was driving. I would ask her, can you stop at the grocery store and pick something up? I'm flying through the kitchen, right? Saying this to her. And I'm continuing to get ready because mornings for school are always crazy. And then I'd come back through and she still hadn't replied to me. And I would get so upset, Rachel. I'm like, Abigail, all I need for you to tell me is if you're going to stop at the store. And she would just still not say anything. I thought I was going to lose my mind. I've got to,
Right,
I've got to keep going, right?
right.
And so then by the end of that morning, I'm usually so frustrated. She's flustered and she also is like, yes, I'm going to stop and do it. And then we both go about our day and started it out in a very frustrated way.
Yeah,
Whereas once I learned to like help her understand, I need you to tell me, even if it's something as small as, hey, mom, I'll let you know. I've got to look at my schedule. I'll let you know before we leave the house. Now I'm going to go, okay, I don't have to keep tabs on her trying to tell me whether she's going to do it or not do it. I'm going to put that on the back burner until we walk out the door. And then she usually could do it. It was just she needed to look at her schedule and be able to see where she could fit it in. It didn't matter to me where she could fit it in. I just wanted
right,
to know if she could do it. Do you see what I
right.
mean? So
Absolutely.
for
Yep.
us, this was huge, a huge piece for us to understand that that's how the other one works. And just doing something small. Honey, would you just let me know before we leave the house? That's all I needed to do to give her the runway to be able to handle that task orientation the way she needed to do it and then be able to reply to me.
Right. So it was a bit of a shift for her, but then both parties are happy.
It was
right?
a shift for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
because I had been doing this with clients and then it like a light bulb went off, like, oh, wait a second.
Mm-hmm.
My family is, we also need to communicate well, right?
Sure.
And once we all kind of figured out how this was working, and now both of my girls are grown and they use this every single day. I mean, I'm just so proud because I have people tell me all the time that meet with them. You know, one of them just got married, so I got to meet a lot of her friends in an area, specifically people who are mentors to her that have said, Shelly, she just is, she's able to articulate anything that she, is thinking. And we always just so, love the conversations with her. And I thought that hasn't always been the case with her, right? She's learned how to adapt her behavioral style and the communication of that other person so they feel, more heard and understood, but also that you kind of get to bond better whenever that communication line is open.
Hmm. And so is this what you mean when you talk about raising the emotional intelligence level of a conversation?
Yes. So if only for that one moment, if you're able to say, okay, I picked up on a couple of things talking to Rachel. I would assume that based on the couple of minutes we've had, to talk to each other, that you are more of that internal processor.
Yeah,
Um,
bingo.
yeah, yeah, and
Yeah, I have my
and
lists and my tasks. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yep, yep. And so, for me to be able to be very precise in my communication to you when you ask a specific question, I want to make sure I'm hitting those specific points that you're actually asking me about so that I don't frustrate you from swaying from the thought or the task that you wanted us to, pay attention to there. And that seems really rudimentary to like say it that way, but it's really not. There's some psychology going on that you feel better in that conversation when I make sure that I am adjusting my style to that, to you. And then that allows you to put those defensive gates down. And instead of going to your fight or flight mode in the back of your brain, now you're going to your frontal lobe, which is the reasoning part of your brain, right? And so once you get to the reasoning part of your brain, then you start thinking creatively. If you're in a work environment, that could mean instead of doing these three tasks, you're going to actually think creative on how you can improve the process as an employee. Now that employer, if they are making them feel that way, and they're going to the frontal lobe, think about what they're getting from them as an employee versus just the tasks that they had already told them to do, right? So when I say raises the emotional intelligence level, it literally is changing where you're processing that info in your brain.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see how that would work because we're too narrowly focused on this has to get done, this has to get done. Why is that not getting done? And we start to talk to each other as human beings, which is, who comprise a business. Then I can see how a lot more could be getting done in that situation.
And
Um,
bonding as a team, when
yeah,
people feel that way, they want to be there. The culture is impacted when somebody is working for a company that they feel like they've been heard. If they
yes.
feel like they understand them and they want to meet them where they are,
Hmm.
they get a different level of employee.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I mean, bringing out that human aspect of it.
Yeah.
So now, how would this work? I was mentioning to you before, many of my listeners are solopreneurs or creatives, and they don't have to have that dynamic with colleagues, but they do have to have some kind of a relationship or communication with clients or patients or whoever they're working with. So how might they pick up on these skills in that regard?
So when I mentioned that I try to separate the quadrant, right? And the quadrant meaning, do they seem to be more task oriented when you're talking to them, or do they seem to be more people focused? It's clues like the people focused one will tell us who they know. Like they bring up names of people. They want to like, tell you, oh, I talked to so and so and they actually did something like this, right? So you're picking up on small little nuances in the conversation. Or are they saying things like, well, it's really important that we get this done by October because if we don't do that, then we've got other things and we're not going to be able to, if we can't jump on it soon, we are not going to be able to do it, right? Our Q4 is just overwhelmed. you can tell a big difference there, right? Between the tasks of things and then the people orientation of things. That gets you halfway on the quadrant. Are they on the top or on the bottom? On the bottom. It doesn't mean top or bottom, but that's of the quadrant. Then are we out in the room processing or are we internal processing, right? Are they using their hands a lot? Are they talking through everything? Does it sound like their sentences are kind of like, you know, streaming consciousness, like it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
really like a formulated, question or whatever? Or is the person maybe thinking for a minute whenever you ask them a question, trying to figure out what they want to say, formulating it, and then when they say it, okay, that now we realize, oh, they just internally process that question or that conversation with me. So now if they're an internal processor, right? But they're people oriented, now I know which quadrant I'm in on
Right.
disc. So
Hmm.
now I can figure that out real early on in the conversation, as long as I'm paying attention. And then I can start framing that conversation more in the style of the person that's internal processing, but people oriented. Now, it takes a little bit of practice.
Yeah, it seems like you would have to juggle a lot in your mind. Be like, okay, and also I'm sorry to interrupt, so I will get so here I am externally processing. But that you have to spend some time to understand their style as well, behavioral style. Okay, sorry.
Well, it's okay. I think that the biggest thing here is get some really good open-ended questions,
Mm-hmm.
because then they're talking and you're not, which is always the better thing anyway when you're talking to a prospect. I've been a sales leader most of my career. You don't want to be the one talking all the time, right?
Right. Right.
And if you don't ask good questions, you can't figure out if there's actually pain for the service you provide or the product you provide. And if there's no pain, they're not going to buy from you. So you don't want to waste your time, right? That's just a little bit of my sales hat that I put on, for a minute. But if you're able to get this behavioral style thing kind of locked in, ask some really good questions, or at least ask questions until you figure out what the style is, right? Like, because they're going to tell you, if you ask a good open-ended question, they're going to give you some clues.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you're wrong about it, at least you're being intentional in the conversation to want to make sure you understand them better, right? And
Yes.
as a business owner, somebody whose paycheck depends on you closing business, wouldn't you want to invest a little bit up front to know exactly what's going on with that specific prospect, so that you can frame or adjust your service offering to what they need, right? If it's in your style, I joke all the time, if you're doing it in your style, you're only wrong about 60% of the time. Those are not very good numbers. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
you want to try to figure out ways to make them feel comfortable with you. There's a lot happening in this dynamic of a sales process.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about selling them something, right? You're there
Right.
to
Right.
provide a good service or a product
Right.
so
Right.
that they feel good about it too. Because if it's a good deal for them, that's a good deal for you, it's probably a good deal.
Right. I just want to back up for people who might not know open-ended questions. I teach this actually.
Go ahead.
Open-ended questions are basically any question that is not answered with a yes or no. So you're asking your client or your colleague or anyone to um, elaborate, and it also helps you to get to know them better, not just their behavioral style, but the who they are as a person, what's important to them, and that's always a good thing, even when we're just talking with family members, right? So it's the same thing, to listen and actively listening to what they're saying and absorbing. So I just wanted to back that up. But
Yeah.
yes, so this isn't about making the sale so much as it is uh, a deeper connection with another human being. And I also, because I come from the psychotherapy background, I also want to stress people, I can hear my listeners going like, isn't that people pleasing? No, it's not people pleasing, because you're not, in my assessment, I want to hear your thought too, Shelly. You're not changing who you are in order to make them feel better. You're adapting to what they need in the moment. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that more importantly, like we all start out with our defensive gates up. We're naturally gonna do this, especially in business because you're not as comfortable, right, with the person, you don't know them. I always say an example is like this. So when you go in and you are trying to uncover the pain of whatever's happening that your service can fill, right? You have to think about it this way. You can't just walk into somebody and be like, so Rachel, what are all the things that are going wrong in your business?
Right.
I mean, nobody wants to hear that things are going wrong in their business, first of all. Second of all, you're not giving the runway here for there to be a bond and rapport moment where they feel comfortable with you. You are adjusting just slightly to whatever behavioral style so that they feel comfortable. Once those defensive gates go down, you don't have to stay in that the entire time. It's just ask some questions that are more, if you know their internal processor, ask a question and wait. Don't ask another question. Don't fill the space. Don't fill the void. Let them think about it. But if you know that that's how they process, as soon as you say something again, you've just stepped on your own question, right?
Right.
So if you're
Right.
not giving that runway for them to be able to express or share it, just because they don't do it so fast doesn't mean they don't have a thought or don't have something valuable that they can offer you. And, in the conversation, so you'll know if this is a good fit as a prospect.
Right. And so moving it so, and yes, what you were saying, the defenses are almost always up. We don't know what we're dealing with. So if we start out thinking like, this is how I expect people to respond when they are going to uh, positively interact with whatever it is I'm selling or sharing or service I'm providing. If I expect it to come out a certain way and it's not, yeah, there can be a real missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you're using this as a tool.
Hmm.
It's not you changing who you are. It's you using it as a tool. And it's not manipulation. Everybody, some people will say that too. It's manipulation. It's more like just think about the last time you hit it off with somebody that you just met. Why do you think you hit it off with them? Because you felt like you had something in common. You probably had a similar behavioral style. And as soon as that happens and you click with somebody like that, all of a sudden the conversation's like comfortable. And now you're talking about things you wouldn't normally talk about. Those defensive gates are down and you're more open. So wouldn't you want your prospect to be more open to your services when you can, have a conversation? Would you rather have a conversation where you're having to hard sell them, or would you rather have a conversation where you're filling a void, where they are actually having something that they need help with and your service can fill that? That
Right.
feels better, right?
Right. For both.
No matter what style you are, that just feels better, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. And it's absolutely not about manipulation because
No,
that's no good for anybody. This
no.
isn't about, in fact, it's good to know who's not the appropriate client for you. And because you don't want to waste anybody's time, right? So I really love this
Including your own.
approach. Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, especially first of all. But, and also it's so funny. I just got an email from another marketing person who was talking about when you have a bad client that you didn't screen properly and the dangers of doing that. So so it's important, I just think on a human level to be able to understand that we are different in the way that we communicate and to be able to, reach across and communicate in a way that they understand, or at least understand how they are communicating is very different. That's why I want to stress it's very different from trying to just adapt yourself to them so you can get the sale. That I
Yeah.
think is a very, very different approach.
Yeah, agreed. And I also think this does take a lot of self-talk, whether you're an internal processor or an external processor, you've got to prep your mind for this kind of, interaction.
Yeah.
And don't be surprised if that is out of a style than what you're normally used to. We call that extended. That's why it's called extended disc. When you're extending yourself into a style that's not you, and you do it for lengths of time, we don't
Hmm.
want you doing it for long periods of time, right? It's just those
Right.
micro interactions that you have. When you do it for a long period of time, you get extended, and this is where you start to feel burnout
Hmm.
because you are literally extending yourself into a style that's not you. It's not authentically you, right? So there's a fine line here. Like, do it in micro doses, but do it in a way that you come back and you re-energize yourself the way you normally would re-energize yourself, right? Whether that's taking a walk or, you know, spending time with your grandkids or whatever it is, right? However you normally like recharge your batteries, because when you extend yourself into somebody else's style like that, right? The benefit is that they feel more heard and understood. You have to be cautious not to spend too much time there so that you don't drain your energy tank.
Right. And that's where professional boundaries come in. Understanding what you're doing, being conscious of what you're doing as you're doing it helps you to, not drain your energy so much
Yeah.
as I see it. Yeah. Beautiful. Well, and I would assume that, as you mentioned, practice is important and maybe getting some help with that is important. So, Shelly, how can people find you?
My website's probably the best, shellystarks.com. And there's a form on there. And if you have questions or if you'd like to learn more about those behavioral styles at some point, my goal, although I work with a lot of corporations now, my goal is to have a second phase to my business where I have kind of a self-help or tutorial side where I do videos for individuals that want to learn to do this, or maybe they want to learn to do it with their family, right? Like we're having a lot of issues at home and teenage years are just hard anyway. So if you can have a tool or something that helps you communicate better with your teenager,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just a matter of having a little bit of sanity in your life.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I get it, for sure. Well, beautiful. So I will have that link, and then I believe you also have you're on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'll have all of those links in the show notes. Shelly Starks, thank you so much for your guidance today and for being on Self Talk.
Thank you, Rachel. I really enjoyed this. I think what you're doing is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And I'm excited to go back and listen to some of your other podcasts too.
Great. Thanks again.